A doctor saves a black boy who collapsed in the street, treating him against all odds. 20 years later, he discovers a shocking secret that will change his life forever. Why does the doctor feel a strange connection with this boy? And what's his secret that will eventually come to haunt him? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the empty streets as Dr. Ethan Collins drove his usual route to the hospital. His mind wandered through his patient list for the day, Mrs. Rodriguez's follow-up appointment, Mr. Chen's test results, and that tricky case in pediatrics that still puzzled him. The steering wheel felt cool under his fingers as he navigated the quiet neighborhood streets. It was peaceful, almost meditative, the calm before another hectic day at the hospital. Then something caught his eye. A small figure lay crumpled at the edge of the sidewalk, partially hidden by the shadow of a maple tree. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He slowed his car, squinting through the windshield for a better look. "Oh no," he whispered, pulling over immediately. Through his open window, he could see it was a young boy, probably 7 or 8 years old, lying motionless on his side. Ethan's medical training kicked in automatically. He grabbed his phone and emergency kit from the passenger seat and rushed to the black boy's side. The child's dark skin had an unhealthy gray tinge, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His breathing came in short, labored gasps. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside the boy. He pressed 2 fingers gently against the child's neck, counting the rapid pulse. "Can you hear me? I'm a doctor. I want to help you." The boy's eyelids fluttered. His lips moved slightly, forming words that barely came out as a whisper. "Daniel. My name's Daniel." "Okay, Daniel. You're going to be all right." Ethan's trained eyes quickly assessed the situation. The boy's skin felt hot to the touch, definitely feverish. His breathing was shallow and irregular, and his pulse was racing. Whatever was wrong, this was serious. Ethan looked around. The street remained deserted. No parents, no concerned neighbors. Nobody who might know this child. He couldn't waste time trying to find out where Daniel came from. The boy needed immediate medical attention. "Daniel, I'm going to take you to the hospital now," Ethan explained, though he wasn't sure if the boy could still hear him. "I'm going to pick you up, okay?" With gentle, practiced movements, Ethan slipped one arm under Daniel's knees and the other behind his shoulders. The boy felt light, too light, in his arms. Daniel's head lolled against Ethan's chest as he carried him to the car. Ethan carefully laid Daniel across the back seat, positioning him on his side in case he became sick. He shrugged off his suit jacket and folded it into a makeshift pillow for the boy's head. Back behind the wheel, Ethan started the engine and flicked on his hazard lights. His usual 15-minute drive to the hospital would take less than 10 today. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in the rearview mirror at his young patient. Daniel's chest rose and fell with each difficult breath. "Hang in there, buddy," Ethan murmured, pressing down on the accelerator. "We're going to get you help." The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open as Ethan rushed in with Daniel in his arms. The familiar antiseptic smell and fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor greeted them, but today felt different. Several heads turned at the unusual sight of Dr. Collins carrying a patient. "I need a bed, Stat," Ethan called out, his voice steady but urgent. Nurse Martinez, who had been updating charts at the front desk, immediately sprang into action, directing him to an empty bay. "What do we have, Dr. Collins?" she asked, already pulling back the crisp white sheets of the hospital bed. Ethan gently laid Daniel down. Young male, approximately 7 or 8 years old, found unconscious on the street. Elevated temperature, rapid pulse, labored breathing. His hands moved swiftly, checking Daniel's vital signs again. Dr. Elisa Grant appeared at his side, her auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Ethan? What's going on?" "I found him lying on the sidewalk on my way in," Ethan explained, not taking his eyes off Daniel. "No ID except for this." He pointed to a plastic bracelet on the boy's wrist bearing the logo of Washington Elementary School. "Let's get a complete blood panel," Ethan ordered. "And I want abdominal scans. There's significant pain response when I palpate his right side." The nurses moved efficiently around them, drawing blood and attaching monitoring equipment. As they worked, Ethan couldn't shake the disturbing questions flooding his mind. Who would leave a child alone like this? Where were his parents? His guardians? The thought of Daniel lying there, sick and vulnerable, made his stomach churn. "I can't understand it, Elisa," he said quietly as they stepped back to let the technicians work. He was just lying there all alone. No adults in sight, no one looking for him. Dr. Grant shook her head, her face reflecting his concern. "It doesn't make sense. A child this age should have been supervised, especially if he was showing signs of illness." Daniel stirred slightly on the bed, his face contorting in pain. Ethan moved closer, watching as the boy's hands instinctively curled around his midsection. The monitors beeped steadily, recording each rapid heartbeat. "Look at how he's guarding his right side," Ethan pointed out to Dr. Grant. "The pain seems localized. Could be appendicitis, could be something else. We'll know more when the tests come back." A technician approached with a tablet, showing the first results from the blood work. Ethan took it, his eyes scanning the numbers, his responsibility to this vulnerable child weighing heavily on his shoulders. Whatever was wrong with Daniel, Ethan was determined to figure it out and make it right. The test results came an hour later, while the hospital authorities tried to find the boy's guardians. Ethan studied the test results with growing concern, his forehead creasing. The numbers confirmed his worst fears. Daniel's condition was deteriorating rapidly. He pulled out his phone and dialed his wife, Sarah's number, knowing she would be on duty in the surgical unit. "Sarah? I need you down in the ER," he said, his voice tense. "We've got a critical case that might need immediate surgery." "Of course," Sarah replied, her tone professional but distant. "I'll be right there." When Sarah arrived minutes later, her steps were measured and careful. She stood at the entrance of the bay, maintaining a noticeable distance from Daniel's bed. Her eyes flickered briefly over the sleeping child before settling on her husband. "What's the situation?" she asked, clipboard held close to her chest like a shield. Ethan, focused entirely on Daniel's charts, didn't notice her stiff posture. 7 or 8-year-old male, presenting with severe abdominal pain and fever. Blood work shows elevated white count, and the scan results. He turned the tablet toward her, pointing at the concerning areas. Sarah nodded mechanically, jotting down notes without moving closer. "I see. What's the surgical plan?" "We need to prep him immediately," Ethan explained, finally looking up at her. "Can you help get everything ready? We'll need the OR within the hour." "Yes, of course," Sarah responded, her voice carefully neutral. She moved around the bed, maintaining as much distance as possible while still performing her duties. Her movements were efficient but detached, lacking the warmth she usually showed patients. "Sarah, could you check his IV?" Ethan asked, reviewing the medication orders. "The flow seems a bit slow." She approached Daniel's bedside with visible reluctance, adjusting the IV with quick, minimal contact. Her usual gentle touch was absent, replaced by clinical efficiency. "I've called Dr. Martinez to assist in surgery," Ethan continued, still absorbed in the medical details. "I want you there too. You're my best surgical nurse." "Of course," Sarah agreed, though her fingers tightened slightly around her clipboard. "I'll make sure everything is prepared." Ethan looked up briefly, catching an odd expression on her face. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said quickly, smoothing her features. "Just thinking about the preparation checklist." As they moved through the preoperative procedures, Sarah maintained her professional demeanor while keeping her interactions with Daniel to an absolute minimum. She coordinated with other staff members, arranged surgical supplies, and completed paperwork, all without directly engaging with their young patient. "OR 2 is ready," Sarah announced, standing by the door. "The team is assembling." Ethan nodded, placing a gentle hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We're going to take good care of you, buddy," he promised, then looked up at Sarah. "Let's get started." The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the recovery room as Ethan checked Daniel's vital signs. A small smile crossed his face. The surgery had gone perfectly. The tumor they'd removed wasn't large, but it had been causing significant inflammation. He made some notes on Daniel's chart, then turned to one of the recovery nurses. "Could you please locate and contact Daniel's family?" he asked. "Check his school ID bracelet for any contact information." While waiting for news about Daniel's family, Ethan stayed close to his young patient, monitoring his condition carefully. The boy's color was already better, his breathing steady and strong. Rapid footsteps in the hallway caught his attention. A woman in her early 30s burst through the door, her eyes wild with worry. "Daniel, my baby," she cried, rushing to the bedside. "Ms. Parker?" Ethan asked gently. "I'm Dr. Collins. I performed Daniel's surgery." She grabbed his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much for saving my son." "Please, sit down," Ethan said, pulling up a chair for her. "Daniel's going to be fine. We found and removed a small tumor that was causing his pain." Ms. Parker wiped her eyes. "He'd been complaining about stomach aches for weeks. I was planning to take him to the doctor, but..." She shook her head. "I didn't know it was this serious." "Can you tell me more about his symptoms?" Ethan asked, taking out his notepad. "When did they start?" As Ms. Parker described Daniel's history of stomach pains, Sarah stood near the door, checking the IV drip with mechanical efficiency. Her movements were quick and precise, but her usual warmth was notably absent. She kept her eyes focused on the medical equipment, avoiding looking directly at Daniel or his mother. "The good news is," Ethan continued, "Daniel should make a full recovery. We'll keep him here for a few days to monitor his progress." "Dr. Collins, I can't thank you enough," Ms. Parker said, holding her son's hand. "If you hadn't found him this morning..." "Nurse Collins will be Daniel's primary care nurse during his stay," Ethan said, gesturing toward Sarah, who gave a brief nod before quickly excusing herself from the room. "Let me show you to the waiting area," Ethan offered, standing up. "We'll keep Daniel sedated for a few more hours, but you can come back soon. I promise he's in good hands." As they walked to the waiting area, Ethan explained the recovery process, providing Ms. Parker with the reassurance she desperately needed. Behind them, Sarah silently disappeared down the hospital corridor, her clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. A few hours passed. "His recovery is progressing well," Ethan said to Ms. Parker, who hadn't left her son's bedside. "Would you mind joining me in my office? We should discuss his post-surgery care plan." Ms. Parker nodded, giving Daniel's hand a gentle squeeze before following Ethan. In his office, Ethan pulled out Daniel's chart. The surgery successfully removed the tumor, but will need regular follow-ups to ensure everything stays on track. Ms. Parker wrung her hands in her lap. "Dr. Collins, I'm worried about the costs. I work 2 jobs, but with Daniel's care..." "We can discuss payment plans and assistance programs," Ethan assured her kindly. "The most important thing is getting Daniel healthy again." Meanwhile, Sarah entered Daniel's room, her footsteps quick and purposeful. She kept her distance as she checked his vitals, her movements mechanical and detached. She acted like she was disgusted by his black skin, but in front of her husband, she hid her prejudices flawlessly. "Does anything hurt?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "My side feels funny, kind of achy." Sarah barely acknowledged his response. "Post-surgical pain is normal," she said dismissively, recording his temperature and blood pressure with minimal commentary. She finished her examination quickly, making only the most basic notes on his chart. As she turned to leave, Daniel called out softly, "Nurse Collins, the pain feels different than before." But Sarah was already walking out, convinced she'd done enough. She found Ethan in the hallway outside his office. "Daniel's vitals are stable," she reported briefly. "Nothing unusual to report." Back in his office, Ethan finished explaining the recovery timeline to Ms. Parker. "We'll monitor him closely over the next few days. With proper care, he should heal completely." "Thank you, Dr. Collins," Ms. Parker said earnestly. "You've been so kind to us." Ethan smiled warmly. "Daniel's in good hands. I'll check on him again this afternoon. But for now, I need to see my other patients. Nurse Collins will keep a close eye on him." He gathered his files, confident in Sarah's report about Daniel's condition, unaware of the crucial detail she'd overlooked during her hasty examination. Over the next day and during each evening's checkup, Sarah entered Daniel's room with the same detached air. She went through the motions of her rounds but kept her distance, noting only the most basic observations in his chart without looking closely at the boy. Each time she recorded stable under his vitals, but her observations were superficial at best, barely skimming the details. In reality, Daniel's discomfort was increasing, subtle signs indicating an infection that would require immediate attention. But Sarah, too unwilling to engage with him more closely, ignored his quiet complaints of pain and fever, instead reassuring him with a brisk, "You'll be just fine." Her gaze remained distant, her demeanor cold, and each checkup became more of a formality than a genuine assessment. When Ethan inquired about Daniel's condition later, Sarah's report was clipped and positive. "He's doing fine, recovering normally," she'd say, confident her reports would go unchallenged. Ethan, trusting her observations, didn't second-guess her judgment or question the integrity of her care. The morning of Daniel's discharge brought a mix of excitement and nervous energy to room 304. Daniel sat up in his bed, already dressed in his regular clothes, while Ms. Parker carefully packed their belongings into a worn backpack. "Remember to keep the incision site clean and dry," Ethan explained, checking Daniel's vitals one last time. "And make sure he takes all his medications exactly as prescribed." Ms. Parker nodded, her eyes focused intently on Ethan's every word. "Yes, doctor. I've written everything down." Sarah stood near the door, clipboard in hand, mechanically going through the discharge paperwork. Her movements were efficient but distant, barely acknowledging Daniel or his mother. "What about his pain medication?" Ms. Parker asked, glancing between Ethan and Sarah. "How often should he take it?" Sarah shuffled the papers. "It's all written in the discharge instructions," she said flatly, avoiding eye contact. Ethan stepped in, his voice warm and patient. "Every 6 hours is needed, Ms. Parker, and please watch for any fever, severe pain, or unusual tiredness. Don't hesitate to call if anything seems off." Ms. Parker's shoulders tensed slightly. "The follow-up appointment, I'm worried about." "We'll work something out," Ethan assured her, understanding the unspoken concern about costs. "There are programs that can help. The important thing is getting Daniel healthy again." "You've been so kind, Dr. Collins," Ms. Parker said, her voice thick with emotion. "Both of you," she added, looking toward Sarah, who merely nodded and continued with her paperwork. "Sarah's been a great help," Ethan said, smiling at his wife. "She's very thorough with her patients." Daniel climbed carefully into the wheelchair that hospital policy required for discharge. His mother stood behind it, gripping the handles tightly. "Now remember," Ethan said, handing Ms. Parker a detailed list of instructions. "Call immediately if you notice any of these warning signs. Better safe than sorry." "Thank you, Doctor," Ms. Parker said softly, tucking the paper into her purse. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Sarah finished the paperwork and handed over the final forms. "Everything's set. You're free to go," she said briskly, already turning toward the door. As Ms. Parker wheeled Daniel toward the elevator, Ethan walked alongside them, discussing the importance of rest and proper nutrition during recovery. The conversation shifted briefly to the challenges of accessing quality healthcare, with Ms. Parker carefully choosing her words as she expressed her concerns about managing ongoing medical expenses. Reaching the hospital entrance, Ethan helped Daniel into Ms. Parker's waiting car, ensuring he was comfortable for the ride home. They exchanged final goodbyes, and Ethan watched as the car pulled away from the curb, carrying Daniel and his mother back to their daily lives. The evening light filtered through thin curtains as Daniel lay on the living room couch, his face pinched with discomfort. Ms. Parker noticed him shifting restlessly, one hand pressed against his stomach. "You okay, baby?" she asked, setting down the dishes she'd been drying. Daniel nodded weakly. "Just hurts a little, Mom." She remembered Dr. Collins's words about post-surgical pain being normal and grabbed Daniel's prescribed pain medication from the kitchen counter. "Here, sweetie. This should help." As the night wore on, Daniel's discomfort grew more obvious. His quiet whimpers turned into sharp gasps, and he couldn't find a comfortable position. Ms. Parker sat beside him, running her fingers through his hair, trying to soothe him while anxiety gnawed at her insides. "The pain's getting worse, isn't it?" she asked around midnight, watching Daniel curl into a tight ball. "Yes," he whispered, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mom, it really hurts." Ms. Parker paced the small living room, glancing repeatedly at her son. The hospital bills from Daniel's surgery already weighed heavily on her mind. Another visit to the emergency room would push them further into debt, but Daniel's pale face and labored breathing scared her. She stayed awake through the night, checking his temperature, offering water, and hoping the pain would ease. But by morning, Daniel looked worse. His face had taken on an ashen color, and even the slightest movement made him wince. "We need to get you checked out," she decided, though her stomach clenched at the thought of more medical bills. After a quick phone call, she found a nearby clinic that offered sliding scale fees. It wasn't ideal, but it was all she could manage. She helped Daniel into his clothes, trying to move him as gently as possible. "I know it hurts, baby," she murmured as he cried out while getting into the car. "We'll get you help soon." The clinic waiting room was crowded when they arrived. Fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the worn furniture and linoleum floors. Daniel leaned heavily against her side as they waited, his face drawn with pain. Ms. Parker filled out paperwork with trembling hands, her mind racing. Had something gone wrong during the surgery? Had they missed something? She thought about Dr. Collins's kindness and Sarah's distant behavior, wondering if she should have pushed harder for answers when Daniel first mentioned the pain. They sat waiting, Daniel's quiet moans drawing concerned glances from other patients. Ms. Parker held him close, praying they would be seen soon, and that whatever was wrong would be something simple to fix. In the small examination room of the clinic, Dr. Martin Lee listened carefully as Ms. Parker explained Daniel's recent surgery. His kind eyes focused on Daniel, who lay curled up on the examination table. "And when did the pain start getting worse?" Dr. Lee asked, gently pressing different areas of Daniel's abdomen. Daniel flinched. "Yesterday evening," he managed through gritted teeth. Dr. Lee frowned, noting the redness around Daniel's surgical site. "His temperature is elevated and there's significant swelling here." He pressed a spot near the incision, causing Daniel to cry out, "I'm sorry, buddy. I know that hurts." After ordering some blood tests, Dr. Lee studied Daniel's hospital records on his tablet. His expression grew more concerned with each swipe of his finger. "Mrs. Parker, I'm seeing some gaps in the post-operative care notes. Was there anything unusual about the nursing care Daniel received?" Ms. Parker hesitated, memories of Sarah's behavior flooding back. "Well, the nurse, she seemed distant. She didn't spend much time checking on Daniel." Her voice grew quiet. She barely looked at him when she came in. "Did Daniel mention any pain to her during his hospital stay?" "Yes," Ms. Parker remembered. "He told me he tried to tell her about some pain, but she trailed off, her throat tightening. Dr. Lee nodded gravely. "These test results show a major infection. It appears something was missed during his post-operative care." He pointed to several spots on the surgical site. "The infection has spread, and we need to address it immediately." Ms. Parker's hands trembled in her lap. Could this have been prevented if... She couldn't finish the sentence, remembering Sarah's cold demeanor, the way she'd hurried through Daniel's checkups, barely acknowledging him. "Early detection of post-surgical infections is crucial," Dr. Lee explained carefully. "Any signs of pain or discomfort should be thoroughly investigated." Tears welled in Ms. Parker's eyes as she watched Daniel grimace in pain. The realization that Sarah's racist act might have caused this made her stomach churn. Yet part of her wondered if she should have spoken up, if she should have demanded more attention for her son. "We'll need to schedule another surgery," Dr. Lee said, his voice gentle but urgent. "The infection needs to be cleared before it spreads further." Ms. Parker nodded, her emotions a tangled mess of anger and regret. She reached for Daniel's hand, squeezing it gently, wondering how different things might have been if Sarah had simply done her job properly. Dr. Lee then worked to save her son. Hours ticked by slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Finally, Dr. Lee emerged, his surgical cap in hand. His expression was measured, but concern lined his face. Ms. Parker stood immediately, her heart pounding. "The surgery was successful in treating the infection," Dr. Lee began gently, guiding Ms. Parker to a quiet consultation room. "But I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Ms. Parker's hands trembled as she sat down. "What is it?" "The infection had spread more extensively than we initially thought," Dr. Lee explained, his voice soft but clear. "It caused significant damage to the nerve tissue in Daniel's lower spine. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Parker, but the damage has resulted in paralysis of his lower body." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Paralysis?" she whispered. "You mean he won't be able to walk?" Dr. Lee nodded solemnly. "This complication could have been prevented with proper post-operative care after his first surgery. The signs of infection were there, but they weren't addressed in time." Tears streamed down Ms. Parker's face as the full weight of the situation crashed over her. Her beautiful, active little boy would never walk again. The negligence that led to this seemed unthinkable. When Daniel began to wake from anesthesia, Ms. Parker sat beside his bed, trying to find the right words. His eyes fluttered open, searching for her face. "Mom?" he mumbled groggily. "I'm here, baby," she said, squeezing his hand. "The surgery went well, but—" her voice caught. "There's something we need to talk about." As gently as she could, Ms. Parker explained what had happened. Daniel's young face showed confusion, then understanding, then a flash of fear. "I won't be able to walk anymore?" he asked, his voice small. "No, sweetheart," she answered, her heart breaking. "But we're going to get through this together." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then squeezed her hand back. "It's okay, Mom. Don't cry." Ms. Parker wiped her tears, amazed at her son's strength. "We'll figure this out, baby. I promise." They held each other close, both beginning to process their new reality. Though Daniel tried to be brave for his mother, she could feel his small body trembling with silent tears. Ms. Parker wheeled Daniel through their front door, both of them exhausted from another physical therapy session. Their small apartment had been rearranged to accommodate Daniel's wheelchair, with furniture pushed against walls to create wider pathways. "You did great today, sweetie," Ms. Parker said, helping Daniel transfer to the couch. Daniel smiled, though his arms were tired from the exercises. "The therapist said I'm getting stronger." Ms. Parker busied herself in the kitchen, preparing dinner while keeping an eye on Daniel through the doorway. Despite everything, his bright spirit continued to amaze her. She watched as he pulled out his science textbook, something he'd been doing more frequently lately. "Mom?" Daniel called out. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, baby." She wiped her hands and joined him on the couch. "I think I know what I want to be when I grow up." His eyes shone with determination. "I want to be a doctor." Ms. Parker's heart swelled. "A doctor?" Daniel nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I want to help kids like me, especially ones who can't afford good doctors. I don't want anyone else to go through what we did." Tears welled up in Ms. Parker's eyes as she listened to her son explain his dream. His words carried wisdom beyond his years, born from difficult experiences but transformed into hope. "You know what else?" Daniel continued. "I want to make sure all kids get treated right, no matter what they look like, white or black." Ms. Parker pulled him close, overwhelmed by his compassion. That evening, as she helped Daniel with his physical therapy exercises, she watched him push through the discomfort with renewed purpose. Later that night, after tucking Daniel into bed, Ms. Parker sat at their small kitchen table with a stack of papers. She'd been researching smaller towns where the cost of living would allow them to save money. Finding one with good schools was essential now more than ever. "Mom?" Daniel's voice called from his bedroom. She found him sitting up in bed. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Do you think I can really do it, become a doctor?" Ms. Parker sat on the edge of his bed, taking his hand. "I know you can, and I'm going to help you every step of the way." "Really?" "Yes, really. In fact," she squeezed his hand, "I've been thinking about us moving somewhere new, somewhere we can save money for your future." Daniel's face lit up. "Like where?" "I've found a few small towns that might be perfect for us. Places where we can start fresh and work toward your dream together." They spent the next hour talking about their plans, Daniel's excitement growing with each detail. Ms. Parker felt a warmth in her chest seeing his enthusiasm, his paralysis forgotten in the glow of his hopes for the future. Growing up was not easy for Daniel. His paralysis meant he had to use a wheelchair, and though his mother always cheered him on, he often faced challenges others didn't understand. At school, some kids stared while others made unkind comments, but Daniel learned to stay strong. "Don't let anyone make you feel small," his mom would remind him, and he kept those words close to his heart. As he got older, Daniel dreamed of becoming a doctor, inspired by the kindness of people who'd helped him. But it wasn't always easy. Sometimes even adults doubted he could achieve his goals. When he applied to medical school, some professors looked at him skeptically, and others made careless comments, doubting someone in a wheelchair could manage the tough job of being a doctor. Daniel faced these moments with quiet strength, determined to prove them wrong. With hard work, late nights of studying, and his mom's encouragement, Daniel graduated near the top of his class. He'd fought through every barrier, learned to navigate every challenge, and never let anyone's prejudice keep him from his dreams. 20 years had transformed Daniel from that determined child into Dr. Daniel Parker, a distinguished surgeon whose skill and dedication had earned him widespread respect. His wheelchair, now a sleek titanium model, moved smoothly through hospital corridors as he performed his rounds, his white coat crisp and professional. In his office, decorated with his medical school diplomas and awards for community service, Daniel held a letter in his hands. The prestigious offer from Metropolitan General Hospital, the very place where he got his first surgery done, sat before him, printed on heavy cardstock. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked, looking up at Ms. Parker, who sat across from his desk. Though her hair had grayed and lines creased her face, her eyes still held the same fierce pride they'd always shown when looking at her son. "It's your decision, baby," she said softly, though her voice carried the weight of their shared memories. "But I know whatever choice you make will be the right one." Daniel wheeled himself to the window, gazing out at the community clinic he'd helped establish. "You know, I've spent years helping people who couldn't afford proper medical care, making sure no child goes through what I did." He turned back to face his mother. "Maybe it's time to take that mission somewhere bigger." Ms. Parker nodded, understanding filling her eyes. "You want to change things from the inside?" "Exactly," Daniel's voice grew stronger. "That hospital has resources, influence. I could help implement real changes in how they treat minority patients, those who can't afford care." He rolled back to his desk, picking up the offer letter again. "It won't be easy going back there, but maybe that's exactly why I should." "You've never taken the easy path anyway," Ms. Parker said with a gentle smile. "Look how far you've come." Daniel reached across the desk to squeeze his mother's hand. "Because of you, Mom. Because you never gave up on me." "And I never will," she replied, her eyes glistening. Later that evening, Daniel composed his acceptance email. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for just a moment before he began typing, each word filled with purpose and determination. When his first day arrived, Daniel wheeled through the hospital's main entrance, his mother by his side. The familiar smell of antiseptic brought back memories, but they no longer held the same power over him. He was no longer that helpless child. He was Dr. Daniel Parker, and he was ready to make a difference. "You've got this," Ms. Parker whispered, giving his shoulder a squeeze. Daniel smiled, straightening his white coat. "Yes, I do." He looked around the bustling lobby, taking in the sight of doctors, nurses, and patients. This place had once changed his life through negligence and prejudice. Now he would change it through compassion and dedication. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital's wide windows as Daniel wheeled down the familiar corridors, now as Dr. Parker. Nurses and staff members greeted him warmly, some remembering him from years ago when he was just a patient. "Dr. Parker, welcome aboard," called out Dr. Martinez, the chief of surgery, leading him through introductions with the medical team. Daniel smiled and shook hands, his confidence and warmth evident in every interaction. As he rounded a corner near the surgical wing, a familiar voice caught his attention. "Daniel? Daniel Parker, is that really you?" Dr. Ethan Collins stood there, his hair now silver at the temples, but with the same kind eyes Daniel remembered from his childhood. Ethan's face lit up with genuine joy as he approached. "Dr. Collins," Daniel greeted him warmly, extending his hand. "It's wonderful to see you again." "Look at you," Ethan beamed, shaking Daniel's hand enthusiastically. "A surgeon now, and from what I hear, one of the best in the state. I couldn't be prouder." Ethan's smile faltered slightly as his eyes took in Daniel's wheelchair. I had no idea about..." He gestured uncertainly. "Oh, this?" Daniel patted the arm of his wheelchair lightly. "There were complications after that first surgery when I was a kid. Certain things weren't caught in time. An infection, I think, and some symptoms that were overlooked." He paused, his voice calm, though a subtle hint of disappointment lingered beneath his words. "Maybe my reports didn't reflect everything. It happens." His tone remained neutral, free of direct accusation. Ethan's face paled as memories of those days resurfaced, particularly Sarah's distant demeanor and the way she had hurried through her checkups. He hadn't questioned her judgments then, never realizing the lasting impact they would have. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea there were complications, or that some things might have been misrepresented." "Life takes unexpected turns," Daniel replied diplomatically, maintaining his professional demeanor. "But it led me here, ready to make a difference for others who might face similar challenges." "The hospital is lucky to have you," Ethan managed, his mind already racing with questions about Sarah's role in what happened. "I'm excited to work alongside everyone here," Daniel said warmly. "There's so much good we can do together." As they wrapped up their conversation, Ethan watched Daniel wheel away toward his first staff meeting, his heart heavy with growing suspicion about his wife's past actions. Daniel, meanwhile, moved forward with purpose, his focus solely on the positive impact he hoped to make in his new role. Ethan drove home that evening with trembling hands on the steering wheel, his knuckles white from gripping it too tightly. The weight of his suspicions about Sarah's involvement in Daniel's tragedy pressed heavily on his heart, making each mile feel like an eternity. As he pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their modest two-story house offering no comfort, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. Inside their home, Sarah greeted him with her usual warm smile, still wearing her pink scrubs from her shift. The smile faded quickly when she saw his troubled expression, the worry lines creasing his forehead. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the cup of tea she'd been holding. "We need to talk about something," Ethan said, his voice tight with tension. "Do you remember a young boy named Daniel Parker? It was about 20 years ago at Memorial Hospital." Sarah's forehead creased as she searched her memory. "I don't think so. We've had so many patients over the years." Ethan pulled out his phone with slightly shaking fingers and showed her Daniel's staff photo. "He was 8 years old when I brought him in for emergency surgery. You were his primary nurse during recovery. Room 304, second week of March. See, these were the case files." Recognition flickered across Sarah's face, followed by visible unease. Her shoulders tensed as she said, "Oh, yes, I remember now. The appendectomy case." "Sarah," Ethan's voice was firm but pained, each word carefully measured. "Did you overlook any symptoms during his recovery due to him being black? Did you ignore any signs of complications? Think carefully before you answer." Sarah stepped back, crossing her arms defensively across her chest, her wedding ring catching the light. "That was so long ago, Ethan. Why are you bringing this up now? Why does it matter?" "Because that boy is now paralyzed from complications that developed after his surgery," Ethan said, his eyes searching hers desperately for any sign of remorse. "Complications that should have been caught early. Complications that any attentive nurse would have noticed." Sarah's face paled to a ghostly white. She sank into a kitchen chair, her defenses crumbling like a sandcastle in the tide. I didn't," she started, then stopped, her fingers fidgeting with her wedding band. After a long moment, she whispered, "He complained about pain. I dismissed it. I thought he was just being difficult." "Why? Don't tell me it was a coincidence." Ethan's voice cracked with emotion. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. I was uncomfortable treating him because he was black. The admission hung heavy in the air like poison gas. I didn't double-check his symptoms like I should have. I just wanted to finish my rounds quickly. I never imagined. Your prejudice paralyzed an 8-year-old boy, Ethan said, his voice filled with disappointment and barely containing anger. He'll never walk again because you chose to ignore his pain, because you decided his skin color made him less worthy of care. Sarah covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with violent sobs. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I never meant for this to happen. I was young and stupid. Sorry doesn't give him back his legs. Ethan cut her off, his words sharp as surgical steel. Your bias destroyed a child's life. Everything he might have become, every race he might have run, every dance he might have danced, gone because of your prejudice. He stood up, his face hard with resolve. You've lost me forever with this, Sarah. I can't be married to someone capable of such cruelty. I don't even know who you are anymore. Sarah sat there, devastated by the weight of her confession and its consequences, mascara running down her cheeks as Ethan walked away, his footsteps echoing through their suddenly silent home. Daniel wheeled through the hospital corridors early the next morning, greeting nurses and fellow doctors with a warm smile. His white coat was crisp, his demeanor professional yet approachable. As he made his morning rounds, checking on patients and reviewing charts, he noticed Dr. Collins watching him from a distance, a troubled expression clouding his usually confident face. Throughout the morning, Daniel focused on his patients with genuine care. In room 412, he spent extra time explaining an upcoming procedure to an elderly woman who spoke limited English, drawing diagrams to help her understand. In pediatrics, he made a young boy laugh despite his fear of needles, sharing stories about his own time as a patient. Ethan observed all of this from afar, his heart heavy with the knowledge of Sarah's confession. He watched as Daniel handled each patient with patience and compassion, regardless of their background. The way Daniel's eyes lit up when explaining medical procedures, how he listened intently to every concern, it showed a dedication that went beyond mere professional duty. Later that afternoon, Ethan found Daniel reviewing patient files in the doctor's lounge. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice slightly unsteady. Daniel looked up from his work. "Of course, Dr. Collins. What's on your mind?" Ethan settled into a chair across from him, choosing his words carefully. "I've been meaning to ask about what happened after your first surgery here. Do you know what caused the complications?" Daniel's expression remained calm, though his hands stilled on the keyboard. "Yes, I do. I learned about the oversight during my medical training. The signs of infection were there, but they weren't properly monitored. And how do you—" Ethan paused, swallowing hard. "How do you feel about that now?" "Honestly?" Daniel turned to face him fully. "I made peace with it years ago. Holding on to anger wouldn't help me achieve my goals. Instead, I chose to use that experience as motivation to become the kind of doctor I needed when I was young." Ethan felt a mix of shame and amazement wash over him. "That's remarkably generous of you." "It's not about being generous," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "It's about understanding that everyone has the capacity to change and grow. The past can't be changed, but we can shape the future. That's why I'm here now, doing what I do." Ethan nodded slowly, struck by the wisdom in Daniel's words. He watched as the younger doctor returned to his work, handling each case with the same careful attention he'd shown all morning. In that moment, Ethan saw Daniel not just as the boy from 20 years ago, but as a remarkable physician who had transformed his pain into purpose. Next day, Sarah's hands trembled as she walked through the hospital's sliding doors. Her nurse's badge, though retired, still hung around her neck, a remnant of her past life here. The familiar antiseptic smell hit her nose as she made her way to the nurse's station, asking where she might find Dr. Parker. "He's taking his break in the doctor's lounge," a young nurse told her, pointing down the hallway. Sarah found him there, reviewing patient charts while sipping coffee. Her throat felt dry as she approached. "Dr. Parker, may I speak with you privately?" Daniel looked up, his expression neutral as he recognized her. Of course, Mrs. Collins. He gestured to an empty consultation room nearby. Once inside, Sarah's carefully prepared words seemed to evaporate. She wrung her hands, fighting back tears. I need to apologize to you. 20 years ago, when you were my patient, I failed you. Not because I lacked skill, but because I let my prejudices affect your care. Daniel set aside his coffee, giving her his full attention. His calm demeanor made her confession both easier and harder. I ignored your symptoms, she continued, her voice shaking. I didn't check thoroughly when you complained of pain. I treated you differently because of the color of your skin, and it cost you so much. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Your paralysis, it's my fault. I can never undo that damage, but I needed you to know how deeply sorry I am. Daniel listened quietly, his hands folded in his lap. When she finished, he surprised her by offering a gentle smile. Thank you for telling me this, Mrs. Collins. It couldn't have been easy to come here today. You're not angry? She asked, bewildered. I was for a long time, he admitted. But anger doesn't heal. It doesn't help me help others. Your actions changed my life forever, yes, but look what I've done with that change. He gestured to his white coat. I became exactly who I needed to be. Sarah wiped her eyes. You're very kind. More than I deserve. This isn't about what you deserve, Daniel said softly. It's about growth. Instead of carrying this guilt, why not use it? Help others examine their biases. Show them it's never too late to change. Sarah nodded, feeling both lighter and more determined. I will. I promise I will. Actually, Daniel leaned forward, his eyes brightening with purpose. I might have an idea about that. He pulled out a well-worn brochure from his desk drawer, its corners slightly dog-eared from frequent handling. I run a small community clinic in the east side of town. We focus on providing care to minorities and families who can't afford regular medical services. It's not much, but we're making a difference. Sarah took the brochure, studying it with interest, his fingers tracing over the photos of smiling patients and staff. This is incredible work you're doing. I had no idea. Many of our patients have faced discrimination in healthcare settings, Daniel explained, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. They come to us because we create a safe space, a place where they know they'll be treated with dignity. If you are serious about changing, you could volunteer there. It would give her a chance to see firsthand how important compassionate care is for everyone. Working directly with the communities I once showed bias against, Ethan nodded thoughtfully, understanding dawning in his eyes. That could be transformative for me. Exactly. It's not just about saying sorry. It's about understanding and growing. Daniel wheeled himself around his desk, his movements fluid and practiced. The clinic needs volunteers, and your nursing experience would be valuable. But more importantly, it would give you the opportunity to connect with people as individuals, not stereotypes, to see their stories, their struggles, their humanity. I think it's perfect, Sarah agreed, straightening in his chair. It's a concrete way for me to make amends while learning and growing. Something real and meaningful. A few days later, Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she parked her car outside Daniel's community clinic. The modest one-story building sat between a corner store and a laundromat, its fresh paint and clean windows standing out against the weathered surroundings. A steady stream of patients walked in and out, their faces reflecting both worry and hope. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed open the glass door. The waiting room buzzed with life, children playing with worn toys in the corner, elderly patients chatting in multiple languages, and staff members moving purposefully between rooms. The smell of coffee and disinfectant mingled in the air, familiar yet somehow different from her usual hospital environment. Good morning, Sarah? Daniel's warm voice caught her attention. He wheeled toward her, his white coat crisp and professional. Ready to get started? Sarah nodded, clutching her purse tightly. Yes, I think so. Let me show you around, Daniel said, leading her through the clinic. This is where we do initial assessments. He gestured to a row of examination rooms. And here's our small lab. We make do with what we have. As they moved through the clinic, Daniel introduced her to the staff. "This is Maria, our receptionist," he said, indicating a middle-aged woman who gave Sarah a friendly wave. "And that's Dr. Chen, who volunteers here twice a week." They paused at the nurse's station, where Daniel's expression grew more serious. "Every patient who walks through those doors deserves our full attention and respect. Many of them work multiple jobs, lack insurance, or face language barriers. Your skills can make a real difference here." Sarah's first patient was an elderly Vietnamese woman accompanied by her grandson, who translated. As Sarah took her vital signs, she noticed the woman's worn shoes and carefully mended sweater. The grandson explained that his grandmother had been putting off medical care because she feared the cost. Throughout the morning, Sarah met more patients: a single father juggling 3 jobs, a teenage girl helping her pregnant sister navigate prenatal care, an elderly black man who hadn't seen a doctor in years because of past discriminatory experiences. Each interaction chipped away at her preconceptions, replacing them with real faces and stories. During a brief lunch break, Sarah watched Daniel interact with a young Hispanic boy who'd come in with a sprained ankle. Daniel spoke to him in Spanish, making the child laugh despite his pain. The boy's mother looked on gratefully, visibly relieved to be understood and cared for. "You're doing well," Daniel told Sarah as she organized supplies. "Remember, every small interaction matters. These people trust us with their health, their dignity, and sometimes their fears. That's a privilege we must honor." Sarah nodded, thinking of all the patients she'd met today. For the first time, she truly saw them, not as categories or statistics, but as individuals with hopes, struggles, and stories of their own. As the day drew to a close, Sarah gathered her belongings, feeling physically tired but mentally awakened. The weight of her past prejudices still lingered, but alongside it grew something new: a desire to learn, to understand, and to provide the care every patient deserved. Over the next few months, Sarah settled into her morning routine at the clinic, organizing patient files and preparing examination rooms. Over the past few weeks, the once unfamiliar environment had become a place where she felt increasingly at home. The faces of regular patients were now familiar, their stories woven into her growing understanding of their struggles. Today she was working with Lena, a young mother whose daughter Maya suffered from severe asthma. As Sarah took Maya's vital signs, Lena spoke softly about their experiences. "Before finding this clinic, we went to 3 different emergency rooms," Lena explained, gently stroking Maya's hair. "At one place, they made us wait for hours. At another, the doctor barely looked at her, just wrote a prescription, and rushed us out." Sarah listened intently, her heart heavy as she recognized the dismissive treatment she herself had once given to patients like Lena and Maya. "That must have been terrifying," she said, carefully adjusting Maya's oxygen monitor. "It was." Lena nodded, her eyes tired but determined. "I work 2 jobs, but insurance is still so expensive. Some months I have to choose between Maya's medications and our rent." As Sarah documented Maya's symptoms, she noticed Daniel watching from the doorway. He gave her an encouraging smile before moving on to his next patient. His silent approval meant more than she could express. During their appointment, Sarah took extra time explaining Maya's treatment plan, making sure Lena understood each step. She found herself sharing tips about local resources and assistance programs she'd learned about from other clinic staff. "Thank you for really listening," Lena said as they finished up. "It means so much to have someone actually care." Those words hit Sarah hard. She remembered countless times she'd rushed through examinations, letting her prejudices blind her to her patient's humanity. Now, looking at Lena's grateful face and Maya's trusting eyes, she felt the full weight of what quality healthcare meant to families like theirs. Later that afternoon, during a quiet moment, Daniel approached her. "I've noticed how you've been with the patients," he said, "especially with Lena today. You've come a long way, Sarah." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I keep thinking about how I used to be," she admitted. "How many people I might have hurt by not giving them the care they deserved." "What matters is who you're choosing to be now," Daniel responded kindly. Sarah watched as the clinic staff worked together seamlessly, Maria coordinating with translators, Dr. Chen consulting with Daniel about a complex case, nurses and medical assistants ensuring every patient felt welcomed and valued. She had become part of this team, this mission, and for the first time in her career, she felt truly fulfilled by her work. That evening, as Sarah gathered her things to leave, she paused to look at a photo of Maya that Lena had shared, showing the little girl playing in a park, her smile bright despite her health challenges. The image served as both a reminder of her past failings and a symbol of her commitment to change. The next day, Daniel and Sarah reviewed their patient's file together. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman with multiple health issues, sat before them, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap. The small examination room felt warm and welcoming despite its modest furnishings. Mrs. Rodriguez has been experiencing severe joint pain, Daniel explained, his wheelchair positioned next to Sarah's chair. His voice carried the gentle authority that had become his trademark. She's been managing with over-the-counter medication, but she needs more comprehensive care. The inflammation in her knees is particularly concerning. Sarah nodded, her expression concerned as she studied the vital signs on the chart. Her blood pressure is also concerning, 160/95 at last check, and she mentioned having trouble affording her medications. She's been splitting pills to make them last longer. They worked together seamlessly, Sarah translating for Mrs. Rodriguez while Daniel outlined treatment options. Their patient watched them with grateful eyes as they found creative solutions to work within her limited means, including connecting her with prescription assistance programs and scheduling follow-up visits at reduced rates. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, clutching her new prescriptions and care instructions, Sarah turned to Daniel. "I never thought I'd be here," she said softly, fidgeting with her pen. "Working alongside you, helping people like Mrs. Rodriguez. It's changed everything for me." Daniel wheeled his chair around to face her directly, his dark eyes reflecting understanding. "You've come a long way, Sarah. I see it every day in how you interact with our patients. Thank you for giving me this chance," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "For showing me what real care looks like. I was so wrong before, and the damage I caused." She paused, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over. "Everyone has the capacity to grow," Daniel replied gently, offering her a tissue from his desk. "What matters is that you recognized your biases and chose to change. That takes courage." Sarah wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara slightly. "Working here, seeing the struggles these patients face, it's opened my eyes. The barriers they encounter, the prejudices they deal with. I was part of that problem before. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about it. And now you're part of the solution," Daniel smiled warmly. "That's what matters. Your past mistakes have made you a more compassionate nurse." They discussed ways to expand the clinic's services, sharing ideas about community outreach and additional funding sources. Their shared passion for helping others had created an unexpected bridge between them, turning their painful history into something meaningful and constructive. They shared a look of understanding and solidarity, acknowledging how far they'd come together. Daniel extended his hand, and Sarah took it warmly, each recognizing their journey from that painful past. The afternoon light cast long shadows across the floor, but the atmosphere between them felt brighter, filled with hope and possibility. "Together we can make a real difference," Daniel said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Together," Sarah echoed, feeling true peace with her place in the clinic for the first time, as her past guilt was replaced by a deep commitment to the work ahead. If you enjoyed the story of Daniel, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.